This episode is sponsored by the Bridge to Recovery, a nonprofit program on 115 acres near Bowling Green, Kentucky, a tranquil place where they've been changing lives for over 40 years. Their people improve their quality of life by acknowledging past emotional wounds and healing from all forms of trauma. The CEO, Paul Hamlin, has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Call him directly at 858-945-7848. That's 858-945-7848. Or you can learn more about the Bridge to Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thebridgetorecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
My name is Dani La Barrie, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
I'm Tom Gentry. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. In this episode, you'll hear my conversation with Dani La Barrie, who's a psychotherapist and happiness transformation coach living and working in Boca Raton, Florida. And this is the first guest who I've had on the show who I hadn't met prior to the interview. So this was the first conversation Dani and I had ever had. She lives and works right down the road from where I live. But I found her on Instagram somehow and crossed paths with her and was immediately interested when I did, because it seemed like the work that Dani is doing with women, which she showcases on her Instagram feed, it's the same sort of work that I want to be doing with men, which in a nutshell is she's helping them become more connected with themselves. So I reached out and I asked her to join me on the show, and this appearance coincides with the release of her first book. It's called Stories of an Ex-Party Girl, How to Feel Happy and Good About Yourself Without Alcohol and Drugs. So, you know, we hear a lot about the opioid crisis in this country. And it's true, we're losing so many people to addiction every single day. But what's also true is that there's an army of people like me and Dani who are out there fighting the fight. And, you know, what I've learned over the course of my career is that, of course, you know, these people need help. They need counseling. They need to do deep therapeutic work. You know, they have a lot of things to sort out. But what's most important is that, you know, the work that we do with them is done with love. You know, because love is what truly heals all of us from whatever it is that ails us. So, you know, that being said, it's apparent to me that Dani gets that. And, you know, she seems to be just full of love and a very giving soul. And, you know, there are a lot of nice things that I could say about her, having only just met her, but I don't really think there's anything better that I can say about her than that. She has heart. She's sincere. And, you know, if there's a young woman in my family who needed help, I would want her with Dani. So here you go. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dani La Barrie.
Just the product of bad seeds.
Dani, how are you?
I am doing great, Tom. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm so excited for this.
Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know you're really, really busy. And it means a lot to me that you would take the time to do this. And And I'm excited. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit. And I know you have a book coming out here this week. And,
I do, yeah.
And tell me
Stories
about
of-
that. What's it called?
Stories of an Ex-Party Girl. It is a book on how to feel happy and good about yourself without alcohol and drugs. So the ebook, the Kindle, is coming out this week, and then working on the print book should be coming out in the next couple weeks. And
Awesome.
then the audiobook also is following that too.
So are you going to be reading the audiobook yourself?
Most likely, yes, just because there's certain parts of the story that I really want to make sure I emphasize to the readers. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a really good place for us to start. Tell me about those parts that if you want to, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, definitely. I'm an open book, no pun intended. So the book it has my story sprinkled in throughout it, but really it's a how-to, and it's intentionally created so that the reader can get from wherever they are to where they're going to, and where they'd like to be. And that's just, which is great that we're doing this podcast as far as really getting people just reconnected to themselves and their authentic self.
Yeah.
I give some tips in there and some exercises that really hone in on that, which I think is really important to having a fulfilling life.
Absolutely. Can't argue with that. So, tell me how you came to write this book. How'd this come about?
Well, funny enough, about 2 or 3 years ago, I told my parents that I've been thinking about writing a book. I want to write a book. And I thought that the book was actually going to be on group therapy session exercises. And I know telling you this as someone that does recovery coaching, I was thinking this book was going to be exercises for other therapists or counselors or coaches.
Right.
Because sometimes we might get in a funk, or we might kind of like, oh, what am I going to do? Maybe we're burnt out. We don't know what we're going to do for a group therapy session. And I found that like some of the exercises and activities that I would share in my supervision with my colleagues or my the therapists that I was supervising, they were really effective. So at that time, that's what the book was going to be about. And I guess, as we evolve and things change and life changes, I found it was more of, I wanted people to not just have the exercises and not just be for group. I wanted to be one of the things, and maybe we'll talk about it a little later, but I've always been a person about like privacy and confidentiality and really being able to explore yourself without fear. And so that's the whole thing with my coaching and being online. So I thought if I created this book where they can be at home in the comfortable, in the comforts of their home with a candle lit and incense, something comfortable, journaling, writing, thinking about things without, having to go out and possibly be in a group. Something about that and the story of the exercises, like why we do these things that we do in therapy or in counseling or in coaching. Mm-hmm. So the book ended up being better than I had planned, really. It just kind of evolved as I evolved and as kind of like the needs seemed to change a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as you know, one of the things about helping people, one of the most important parts of it is removing the barriers that exist in the first place. And in my experience, one of those is, I often hear from newer clients, I don't want to do a group. I'll talk to someone individually, but they almost never want to do group. So I could see where that would, make your audience all that smaller, maybe. But maybe that group book maybe that's coming out down the road. You never know. Maybe this is just the book you're supposed to be writing right now.
Right, right. And also too, what's great is that it's a book that really it's geared towards women, but anyone could read it. So even if, let's say, a therapist or coach or a counselor or somebody that's on their own transformational journey happens to read the book, they could in turn use the exercises that are in it to help their clients too. So it's helpful in a lot of ways, I guess. And it's just, I'm going for that ripple effect.
Yeah. Well, must be a pretty exciting time in your life to have your first book coming out. You have to be really excited.
Exciting.
Right?
Yeah. I'm excited, but also, of course, a little worried. That's natural. And of course, I'm worried about what people are going to think. What are they going to say? I know my parents are very anxious.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll appreciate hearing you laugh that way too.
Yeah, so it is very exciting, but I'm also extremely nervous too about how people are going to respond to it.
I get that. As we're recording this, I submitted the first episode of this podcast today to be released on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play tomorrow.
Nice.
So, I can totally relate because, I'm pulling back the curtain on my life to the world. And that's there's definitely some feelings of vulnerability that have come up for me with that. And, even, to the point where I think you've noticed I started with a different title of the show and, came to learn through this process that I was kind of hiding behind the title and I needed something that was kind of more out and more about me, rather than using the name of some fictitious person that would then confuse people, So, I can see where, and I imagine you have some stories in your book that are, pretty intimate details of challenges that you've been through, or else what would there be to write about, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think some people call it, it's almost like a vulnerability hangover. Really when you put yourself out there authentically and vulnerably for the world to kind of, respond to. So, but the benefit of it, of course, is the people that get epiphanies and aha moments from listening and learning from the experiences. And I'm actually glad that you did that because I'm looking at my calendar today and I'm thinking, wait, was his name Tom or Billy?
Right. Well, it's, I have this, first of all, I'm a Kurt Vonnegut fan. I mean, I write and I love to read and I don't know if you know, but Billy Pilgrim was the protagonist in his, Pulitzer Prize winning war novel that's called, oh my God, am I going to forget it? Slaughterhouse-Five. And he's just like the quintessential guy on a search for meaning in life. So that's what that was about. Because that's me, I'm looking for the answers, and that's part of what this show is about. And, but the problem was, instead of what I really wanted it to be about is authenticity, authentic people like you and people who I can talk to who can help me and everybody else become increasingly authentic. And so, at some point as I'm getting ready to launch this thing, I'm thinking, I need to promote myself here. And also, I don't need to have to tell this elaborate story of how this show, what the title means. I mean, I could just say what it actually is. It's about the path to authenticity. So yeah, I mean, the whole vulnerability thing. But you know what? And this is a good point too, because I had to go through that. I had to feel that uncertainty and I had to be scared and I had to walk through the fear. And I think that's what that's one of the huge benefits of doing this kind of work, is that we get to work on ourselves. And actually, when we help other people, we're healing ourselves as well, as you know, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. And I've learned that so much of whatever is going on in my life, and it doesn't matter in what area, but whatever is going on is completely a reflection of what's going on inside.
Absolutely.
Completely. Every time, for everything, whether it's friendships, relationships, something going on with coworkers, at work, peers, it's just any kind of conflict, anything that I notice and I get agitated with, I usually now stop and look and see, where is that coming from?
Yeah.
And even with the clients too, sometimes it's interesting how I might attract certain people at certain times of their lives, depending on what's going on with me metaphorically or something in my own life.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how that works, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, in a sense, I mean, we're always creating our own reality anyway. So whatever we're seeing in a person is what we're projecting onto them.
Right.
You know, it might not necessarily have anything to do with the reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Wow. We could go really, really deep, couldn't we? We're kind of getting there. I love it.
We could. I love those kinds of conversations.
Me too. And that's another reason why I wanted to do this, because I'm not a small talk guy. You know, it's agonizing to me, especially if it's with someone who I don't want to be talking to, you know, or I'd rather be doing something else. But conversations like this, I could have all day and night, you know, where you actually get to learn about somebody and something.
Right. That's exactly what I was saying too. Yeah.
So, tell me about your career? What's it look like aside from the writing? What are you doing day to day?
So I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a happiness transformation coach. And I work primarily with women who are feeling unfulfilled. They're seeking happiness. They're seeking feeling grounded. Maybe things are feeling a little bit chaotic around them. And I do my coaching online. So that way of course, it's convenient because then they can do it from anywhere. But it's also private. So I'm working on breaking the stigma with therapy and coaching. So my intention with doing the coaching online is in doing that, breaking that stigma. And I do work part-time at a treatment center in West Palm Beach. And between that and my clients, and then of course I lead a beach meditation in Boca Raton the second Saturday of every month. That has been growing, and I love doing that too. I have a lot of people that come to that are really looking for ways to relieve stress. And it can be any kind of stress. I mean, stress from work, coworkers, their boss. Recently I had someone, she shared with me that her dog had just passed away, and she had the dog for many years. I can't remember if he was 18, I think.
Wow.
And she came to that meditation specifically to be able to relieve the deep emotional stress and the deep just grief. I mean, nothing's going to make it go away, of course, right? Because it's grief, but just being able to handle it and manage it and just feel some sort of relief. And I've had a few people there who are going through divorces. And so I'm enjoying seeing it grow, and how people have been coming to the beach with this intention of healing. And it's awesome. So that's what my days look like. And I also lead cacao ceremonies too. Are you familiar with cacao, Tom?
I'm not.
So, cacao is raw chocolate in its purest form. And just like how melatonin can make you sleepy, cacao has theobromine in it, which naturally uplifts your mood.
Okay.
If you're familiar with the 7 chakras, it's a heart chakra opener. So it's a heart opener. And it's known as a food of the gods. And in ancient civilization times, they used ceremonial cacao. They used cacao as a way to have ceremonies and celebrate things. So I use the cacao as a tool to uplift the mood. And along with music, I do a guided dance meditation.
Wow.
And it really helps move women through the healing process of low self-worth, low self-esteem, not feeling very good or confident, or just not feeling at home, in your body.
Yeah.
So that is another thing that has kind of taken a life of its own. I almost forgot to even mention it because it's not something that I had planned.
It just happened. That's how some of the best things come about.
Yeah. That's what happens when you have the intention to serve. I just think about what could I do this is what's helping me in my journey. Let's see if it will help other people. And it has been, so that's great.
Yeah. Well, I'm, being a guy in long-term recovery, I've done my share of reading about men's work, and, that's kind of my thing. And one of the things that is conspicuously absent with men in our culture is ceremony, and most, I guess, let me say, more emotionally balanced cultures, male cultures, they have a rite of passage between boyhood and manhood. And we don't really have that. Some ethnicities, some religions in our culture have it, but in general, we don't really do it. Like, we're really bad at teaching men how to be men. We're a little better at teaching women how to be women, but we're terrible at teaching men how to be men. So I'm getting off on a tangent a little bit, but my point is, I think that's something with our culture kind of veering away from religion over the last, let's say, half century. One of the things that we've lost a little bit from that is the ceremony part of it, which really, to me, adds a lot of flavor and meaning to life.
Yeah.
And, I grew up in a Catholic home. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but there's a part of me that will, I still go to church occasionally, and there's part of me that will always love it because of the ceremony of it, the beauty of it, there's really not anywhere else that I, off the top of my head, where I can say I'm getting that, unless I'm intentional about creating it myself, which is something I've learned to begin to do, is to start to institute those things in life, and as a way to honor life and to make it feel more sacred, because that's kind of like one of my core beliefs, that life is sacred and the path that we're on is a sacred path, no matter who we are, Anyway, I'm talking too much. I should be letting you talk more.
No, this is great. And I'm so glad that you're bringing it up, because I agree. And a friend of mine, we are always into learning more about femininity as well as masculinity too. That might be a whole nother podcast, but
absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that I love talking about and working on and supporting people on, because there has been such an awakening now, and people awakening, just waking up to life, and men stepping up and women being that soil, that nurturing space, and men being the protectors. And that's a whole nother conversation though. And I don't want to make sure, I'm sure I need to stay focused on what
No,
we're
it's
talking
okay.
about.
I mean, you can come back
I
sometime. We can talk about it.
Yeah, I love that stuff, and even really understanding this thing of when people talk about, finding their 10 relationship and finding their soulmate and learning about how the people that we date are a reflection of the wounds that we're healing still, and things like that, even like just that, the whole thing of the external environment being such a reflection of what's going on inside is even just as simple as the person that you're dating too. And, I think that, there was a time, and, especially during the time with the women's movement, women felt suppressed. And I think that it's like the pendulum swung and it got to a point where, we kind of, and I'm probably overgeneralizing this. This is just from podcasts and reading articles. So these are just generalizations. But women really having to take a stand up for what they want and learning to become assertive, so much so that some women are very, very alpha. And like, I'll just use myself as an example of being so driven in my business, in my line of work, and when I was in school and my personal life, and then learning how to pull that in or reel it in the times of being in a relationship. Because if I carry that same alpha way into my relationship, it may not work because of that clashing with the masculinity. And then men too, now also during this time, seeing women step up and become so independent, and we want to, we're so independent that men now are kind of confused, and they're like, well, I thought I was the protector. What, like, should I step back? Should I let her be, the alpha woman? So it's awesome that people are starting to even talk about, men getting in tune with their masculinity, women getting in tune with their femininity, and then how the two, obviously men have femininity too, and women have masculinity as well. But I mean, just the beauty of how the balance of everything coming together as people are learning more and more about themselves. So I'm like you, I could talk about it too.
Well, I think, understanding about ourselves is probably the most important point of all of this, and really, the way that I came to really going deep into this kind of work, was going through a divorce because, we ended up, we saw a succession of different therapists, but the last one we met with really helped me with that stuff. I don't know if you're familiar. There's an author by the name of William Bly, and he wrote a book called Iron John. And it talks about manhood, and he was kind of the central figure in what was called the mythopoetic men's movement, which was really popular with people in recovery 20 years ago. And some of the people I know who I've been close to over the years, some of the men were involved with it many years ago. But, this guy really brought that work to life for me, this therapist. And I began to see, I was a provider. I was there. I'm a good man, always knew I was a good man. But what I didn't see was how I wasn't showing up as a man, and how I wasn't tapped into my male power. I was passive in a lot of ways. And so, I began to see how I manifested the problem. And then I started to see how I could change. And then, as years go by and I begin to use these tools, lo and behold, that part of my life becomes better and better because I understand me and I understand what I need to learn and what I need to do to show up. And I understand, when I'm being weak, and I'm really interested in, the idea of male power, masculine power. And I think it's something that's, really misunderstood. It's something that's often abused, especially in our culture. And I've written some about this. I've written a lot about men and this, and, one of the things that I've seen is that we have, the Hollywood producers who are like, predators who are abusing their power. And then we have the men at the other end of the spectrum who are emasculated and, they're marching at the women's rallies and all that stuff. So, but where's the in between? Where's the healthy, beneficent male who is masculine, who's not a predator, who has power and uses it for good? And those examples are pretty difficult to find in our culture. They are.
Yeah, and then that's where it comes in of when you look around, or when we look around and we don't see it, then we create it or become it or be it, and then attract those people because we don't know what we don't know, right?
Right.
So I think that when we've all kind of been doing what we've been doing and not really noticing it. I think we said that just before we started recording the podcast, of not really, we knew we wanted more, but we didn't really know it, kind of thing. And I think it's the same thing too as that as well, of we kind of people not really knowing and just kind of moving along in life until if it's, a man in this case, and somebody that comes across you. And I'm so glad to know that, that's your niche too, because I have actually been looking for someone to collaborate with that is a man to lead men.
Right.
Because how cool would that be when you are able, like with one of the cacao ceremonies, the first one I did, it was mixed, it was men and women. And there was a certain part of the meditation where I called the men out and I guided them to getting connected to their divine masculinity. And then in the same tone, I was also calling the women to connect to their sacred femininity. And the energy in the room was really amazing. And it wasn't anything sexual, anything like, and as far as like when I say energy, it wasn't even anything like needing to be intimate. Just as far as people getting connected to their authentic self and being comfortable, like their soul feeling comfortable in their body, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we can talk more about that. I'd love that.
Yeah.
So what's it, I'm not going to ask you how old you are because that wouldn't be right, but, where you are in your life, what is it?
It's okay, but it's fun because people usually wonder, I guess because I'm Asian. I'm 31. I've been a therapist for 11 years.
Okay.
I graduated FIU. I got my bachelor's in social work with a minor in psychology in 2008. And then I got my master's in social work in 2009. But people they always tell me I look like I'm 23, which I hear is a compliment.
Yeah. Well, and Asian people tend to age pretty well.
Yeah, exactly.
But so the reason I ask though is, what has it been like to come of age as a woman and to mature through her 20s as a person in recovery? And, what's that experience been like for you?
It has been bittersweet. There are times, actually, telling a friend of mine recently how I went to a women's leadership summit recently, and every time I think, okay, you know, I've figured myself out. I know who I am. I know what I like, what I don't like. Every time I think that I'm like, okay, I'm here. I got this, or I know this, or I'm aware of myself now. It's always another layer.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, okay, everyone says that 30s are better than 20s because 20s, I'm figuring myself out. 30s, I will admit that I am more confident. I have a lot more clarity than I did in my 20s. But still, there's still more. There just keeps being layers. Layers don't stop.
No, definitely not.
So it is. It's bittersweet. It is. It's great because I get to know myself, but at the same time, it's a commitment. You know, I think the people that are in this line of work, any kind of healer, coaches, therapists, any person that's serving other people, I think we're the most effective when we are helping ourselves too. And for a while, I wasn't doing that. I was actually, for quite some time, I was a therapist and telling people not to do the very thing that I was doing. You know, I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wanted to help other people when I really needed to help myself.
That's not very authentic, is it?
Right, exactly. Which is it's interesting you say that because that's parallel to the time of when I was using drugs.
Right.
So, and then eventually realizing that no one is going to save me but myself. I need to save myself.
Right.
It's great to have motivation, of course, but at the end of it, it's really that I needed to save myself. But yeah, anyway, so it's been bittersweet. It's great learning myself, but at the same time, it's uncomfortable growing. Growth is, you know, uncomfortable. But getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, there's that. But, you know, in hindsight, looking back on my life, the only thing that I can think of that is probably more uncomfortable than growth is our resistance to it, because it's inevitable. It has to happen. I mean, we can fight it and it'll be a lot worse and we'll be even more exhausted and hurt. But, you know, so it's much better just to embrace it and accept that. I think a big part of it for me is just coming to the conclusion that I don't know everything. Mm-hmm. You know, at some point in life, it's like, I think just naturally as human beings, we just kind of assume that we know everything and understand everything, at least on some level. And then eventually the light bulb goes off that, you know, I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself by acting like I know everything. Because I really don't. And it would be a lot easier to connect with another human being and get some help in this, you know, because I think about some of the people who I've had difficulty in relationships with, even in my recent past. It's like, you know, they think they know everything. And, you know, and when you're closed off in that way, it's a lot harder to take a seat at the table and look at the person across from you eye to eye and like collaborate on life. You know, I mean, if you think you know everything, that's not going to happen. It's just not.
I like the point that you made of letting go of the resistance, because I think that does make it that does make a big difference. Actually, it does. It makes a big difference when I notice that when I release, because you're right, in change is going to happen. That's something that's most consistent. So might as well surrender to it. And I do notice that when I'm not as resistant to the change, it is easier for me to just move through it and remind myself there's a much bigger picture here.
Yeah. And, you know, in terms of addressing the stigma that you talked about earlier, you know, I'm a big fan of individual counseling. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like if there's help to be had, why wouldn't I avail myself of it? And we just don't know everything. We don't know how to do everything. And also to have another person's perspective can be pretty helpful. And there is such a negative stigma attached to it in our culture, which I hope is on its way out. I really do. And if there's anything I can do to dispel that, I want to do it too. But my point in bringing that up is that I'm in therapy. I mean, like at this point in my life, it's really important that I'm consistent with it. Same time, same day, every single week. And I've been working really, really hard. And I was, because I'm like excavating things, and because, we carry these feelings in our bodies, and when we don't properly experience them, we retain them. And, so I'm going through stuff that I, needed to feel probably, before you were alive. And I walked in and sat down in that office one day about 4 months ago. And I said, this just feeling all this stuff, it's just so exhausting. And she looked at me and said, your resistance to it is exhausting. The feelings aren't. And you know what? If we don't resist the emotion, it's not that exhausting. It comes and goes. It doesn't last a long time, but we fight it so hard, especially emotions that we attach a negative meaning to. We fight it so hard that it makes it a gazillion times worse. Yeah. It really does. So I'm a big, sometimes I jokingly refer to myself as a feelings coach. Sorry, that's Caesar making a ruckus right now and barking at nothing, which is what he does occasionally. But
Caesar wants to put his input in the podcast.
Well, he has done that. He's put his stamp on this podcast, and he's in my lap now.
Sometimes people have a stereotype that, or an assumption that it's going to be a drab, it's going to be forever as far as the sessions. And hopefully, if as people are listening to this, that they're aware that everyone is different. And not everyone it's not always going to be, you see somebody every week and it's just for an infinite amount of time. Some people do it where it's 3 months at a time or a year at a time specifically, and it's very goal oriented. And there just seems to be these assumptions that it's just forever and it's there is no end to it. And we just talk about my childhood and all the past and things that I don't want to talk about, but everyone is different. Every coach is different. Every therapist is different. Some people really look at the present and more today focus and what do you want to do and achieve today rather than even really delving into childhood. So hopefully, as people are listening to your podcast, that they become aware of that too.
Well, and one of the also, I mean, people kind of look down their nose at it and kind of make a joke of it at times, which is unfortunate, and the term shrink, I really don't like. But one of the things, I mean, as I'm sure you do, I meet a lot of people who could really benefit from therapy, but they're resistant to it. They're like, no, I don't want to do that. Especially guys, And one of the things that I encourage them to do is to go in with an agenda. What is something you're struggling with in life? Ask them to help you with that. It doesn't have to be this navel gazing, like digging up my past kind of thing. You can talk to them about, they can help you with boundaries. They can help you with the relationships you're struggling with. They can help you at work. They can help you be happier. I mean, there are all sorts of short-term benefits that can be reaped. But if you go in there without a plan, I mean, who knows where it's going to go, especially if you're not with a great therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even, even if somebody may feel like, even if they're not struggling too, how can we improve the quality of life to where it's enjoyable, to where we wake up every day excited about life, we're passionate about it, we're, there's fire in our eyes and in our heart. Because something that I'm learning too is I'm pivoting because I'm moving away from working in treatment centers and heroin addiction and cocaine and meth and all that to women who are feeling unhappy. I noticed that, speaking about like law of attraction, and when we think about not thinking about something, we're still attracting it. So even if somebody's listening and they think, well, I'm not struggling with anything, okay, well, let's look at how we can improve what you already have. And how do we shift the thinking of like, how can this be even better? How can we feel happier? How can we enjoy the reality? How can we create it and now sit and then live in it and enjoy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, aside from just the fact that when you go and bare your soul with another human being for an hour, you feel a lot better when you leave. I mean, that's the way it works. That's life. There are just so many benefits from it. And I just, it's like one of those things that it's a gift that I've been able to experience that sometimes people I love, I wish they could experience it too. But if they're not open-minded enough to do it, there's kind of nothing you can do about that. But the other approach that I think is really good for people who are averse to it is, one of the ways that I've used it is in times like times of major change, when major decisions need to be made. Those transitional periods in life are also a time when I've used it. And like, I don't think there's anything more difficult for a human being to take part in than a relationship, especially a romantic relationship. And there have been times when, like, there's a girl I want to ask out. I'm talking about like early recovery. Like, before I do that, I'm going to start meeting with this therapist. I'm going to walk through the entire process from start to finish with guidance, because I don't know how to do this. I don't. That's another axe that I kind of like to grind in my life, is that we're really not good at teaching people how to be in partnership, in relationships, especially in our culture, and there's just this, sort of universal, belief that we've accepted as a culture that when you graduate from high school, college, then the next thing you're supposed to do is get married and have kids. And if you don't do that in a timely manner, then there's something wrong with you. And so if too many years go by and you look back on that, then you should feel ashamed. And I mean, and then the next thing you know, I mean, basically what I did is I rushed. I thought, this is it. I need to do this. It's later than it's supposed to be. And I thought just because I wanted it to work, it was going to work. And that's not how life is, I mean, I had a lot of things that I needed to learn for it to really succeed that I didn't know yet. And a lot of it is because, we just buy into this fairy tale as a culture when, we need to learn how to love ourselves first.
Yeah, exactly. And I noticed that, when I have a therapist right now, I have two coaches, actually. I have more than one. Actually, I have three. I have them in different areas of my life because they keep me accountable. And as human beings that we are, I veer off path. And my veering off path happens to be like almost every 30 days. So it works out because that's about the time I check in with them. I check in with them usually like 2 to 3 times a month. Of having that space to be able to vent and work through things without someone giving you, they're able to be objective with you too.
Yeah.
And with what you were saying as far as relationships and everything, and I know that with early recovery, that tends to be somewhat of a controversial thing, because people will say, it's better to be by yourself. And here's the thing too, is that if my clients really they want to be in a relationship, I would end up wasting time trying to talk them out of it rather than just working with them while they're in it. And it's difficult because they're still working through their own stuff as a person, as an individual. And then to put in another personality in the mix. And this is just in the context of early recovery. If you take out addiction, like, relationships are complicated in and of itself.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, when we're figuring things out as we go, and sometimes I wonder, if that's why the divorce rate is so high in the United States. I wonder if it's because we're not very aware of ourselves. We get involved in relationships and then don't really know. We haven't really gotten to know the authentic us yet.
Right. Well, and there's so much material to cover here.
I know that's a whole nother podcast.
But as a culture, I think a big part of it is, and this is kind of having worked in the addiction treatment industry for over 20 years. One of the things that drives me kind of crazy is we focus a lot on the problem. And we haven't done a very good job either. I mean, we've done a terrible job of documenting outcomes. Mm-hmm. We've done a terrible job of articulating our message clearly. The insurance industry runs roughshod over us because we don't have our shit together. I mean, basically that's what's going on. But meanwhile, all you hear about is length of abstinence. You hear about, relapse prevention, all that kind of stuff. You hear about medication assisted treatment. What about actually addressing the problem? Which, if you're a follower of 12-step philosophy, the substance is not the problem. I'm the problem. So why are we not focusing on what the problem really is, which is healing ourselves? So instead, people are bragging about, what percentage of people they get to stay sober for a year. And then, I've met an awful lot of people who've been sober for a long time who are pretty miserable and who treat people terribly. You can be sober and still have a, pretty unfulfilling life. But what about really working on ourselves, having a spiritual connection? Because in our culture, it's always about the next thing, the next job, the next car, the next house, the next relationship. And, we're so terrible at just being in the here and now, feeling our feelings, experiencing life fully. And, there's not a lot of meaning that can be derived from all the toys. There's just not. It can be enjoyable, but then when, the gas runs out of the jet ski, then what? Then what? Then what are you going to do? There's always something else. And it's something that I've tried to teach my little boy that can we go get this or can we go do that? And I'll tell him, you can be happy now if you want to. It's totally up to you. If you want to be upset because you don't have this color of bracelet or whatever, then that's your choice, but you're creating this experience. Exactly. And we do that. We do that as a culture. We are so defocused on what's important. Yeah. There I go again, off on another tangent.
No, that's what happens when we're both very passionate about similar things. We could just go in different directions with it. And it always comes down to the self. It always comes down to the self.
Yeah.
And healing the self. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And, like the relationship thing, definitely, as a guy in his early 20s and early recovery, I had the people telling me, stay out of relationships. And I mean, and that's kind of the conventional wisdom is that's what you should do. And I'm like you, like if I tell a guy not to get a girlfriend, he's going to do it anyway. And then he's not going to talk to me about it. And I would rather that he talks to me about it and I can walk him through it. And then he can reach the conclusion on his own that it's a bad idea.
Right.
Then he won't do it anymore. Right. Because that's what happens. That's what happens. And meanwhile, we tell people not to be in relationships. And then as an industry, in the next breath, we tell them, well, the way you heal is through relationships. So it's like this crazy mixed message, But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I've come to learn is that all of this, life, relationships, it's all opportunities to heal. Mm-hmm. And that's really our job as human beings is to be in touch with our wounds, to acknowledge our suffering, and then we can be better for someone else and be present with someone else, with them and their pain. And it just is, it enables us to have real intimacy and real connection. And this is a perfect example of what we're not taught about how to be in a relationship with people. We're taught a man's supposed to do this, a woman's supposed to do that. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. And I mean, it's just all this stupid stuff that doesn't work. It's crazy. Yeah. So, and a lot of it's rooted in fear rather than love. And that's another big one is that I've learned. It's like, if I can just come from a place of love, whatever I'm doing, if I can just be intentional about doing that, whatever it is, it's going to go better.
Oh, right. Definitely. And following your heart too.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me if somebody wants to work with you, who is your ideal client and what would they need to do if they wanted to work with Dani La Barrie?
So I work with women who are feeling unfulfilled, maybe going from relationship to relationship. They've been feeling unhappy or like something is missing. And they want more to life. They've been craving more. They want to get back to maybe they were very happy at one point in their life. And maybe they lost that point and wanting to get reconnected to it again. And to get in contact with me, I'm actually, it's so funny, I'm right in the middle right now of an email and website transition. I just am at DaniLaBarrie.com, right? And it's not quite done yet, but it should be soon. So my email is Dani, D-A-N-I, at DaniLaBarrie.com, D-A-N-I-L-A, B as in boy, A-R-R-I-E. So that's really exciting. And, so contacting me via email. I'm also on Instagram as Dani La Barrie. And I usually offer a complimentary coaching session anyway for the first session because I really like to get to know the person, what's going on, what are their goals, what are they really looking for in life, what's their why do they want to do this. So the first session is complimentary anyway, and it just really digs deep into where is their intention, what do they want their life to look like. So that's about me and contacting me, and I really appreciate once again you having me here. This is very, I can't tell you again how excited I am about you doing this because I'm such a proponent of authenticity. I've been that person that was picked on my entire life for being too sensitive and for having feelings and for crying too much and being woo-woo and spiritual. And so I am always very excited when someone else is out there and is about being authentic and being true to yourself and accepting other people for the way that they are. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. And in terms of your website, by the time this is out, your website will be up and going, and I'll have, in the show notes, links to all your information as well. So anyone listening can find you that way. But man, I really appreciate you doing this. This has been a blast, and I'm definitely going to want to do it again.
Yes, yeah, because there are some topics that we talked about that I'm like, we need to do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thanks a lot. I really, really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Tom.
Right.
Take care.
Yeah. All right. There you have it. Dani La Barrie. Pick up a copy of her book. You can find a link to her Amazon page in the show notes. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, I hope you'll take a moment and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever it is you listen to podcasts. That would be a big help. You can also find the show at patreon.com/thepath-to-authenticity. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. Both are at The Path to Authenticity. If you want to learn more about me, you can visit tomgentry.net. Really appreciate you taking the time and listening to the show. Hope you come back. Be nice.
Great, honeybee.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.